You know how fast you were going?
What? How fast you were going?
I don't know. 10?
8.
Be advised, this is an explicit podcast. If you're easily offended, get your panties twisted into a knot. Leave now. Run in your safe space. Get your little cloth for your tears. All the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and his guest and do not reflect the opinions of any local or government agency. Welcome to another episode of Motor Cop Chronicles podcast. I'm your host, as always, the Iceman. Gonna run through the housekeeping real quick because we got a guest sitting in the green room, and I'm excited to have them. So, of course, as usual, if anybody wants any Motor Cop merch, go over to the Etsy store, motorcopchronicles.com, or go to the website, motorcopchronicles.com. They got a merch section on there also. Everything's priced as cheap as it can be. I just want the logo out there. If you want a great cigar by a small businessman, a patriot, you can go to mypatriotcigar.com, put in the promo code MotorCop15, get 15% off your order, and premium cigars, hand rolled and stuff like that. They're awesome. And if you would like any extra episodes of Motor Cop Chronicles, pictures, videos, text, I'm always posting stuff up there on the Patreon. I got 3 different tiers: $3, $5, and $10. $10 you'll get in the clubhouse, and I'll send you a free members only mug, and I usually send something right around Christmas time too. Speaking of the Patreons, I got a hang around who is on Stacy McClendon. We have our crew members, Alex Owens, we got Kelly Meyer, we got standby. Got to apply my filter. We got Kelly Meyer, we got Mr. Thomas Barnes, we got Mr. William Gibo, Jared Nitrous, Motor Cop for Life. We got Mr. John DeMink. We got T-Bird. We got Dan Carlson with Burley Boards. Y'all go check out Burley Boards. Get yourself on one of them handmade cutting boards. Good for home defense, smacking a bad guy in the head, spanking your kids with, or swatting your wife, if you get my drift. We got Mr. Hoppy Hobson, our favorite truck driver. We got Mr. Blake Walker. We got Aaron with the Had to Say It podcast. Y'all can check him out. Always putting out great content. Mr. Z Palmer. We have Roy Spalding, Roy with the S, not Roy with the P. We got JoJo, our favorite Australian girl. We got Kaylee Norris and Natasha A., my girl from Washington. Appreciate y'all helping me pay the bills, keeping the lights on. Now, without further ado, since we got all that out the way, we are going to introduce, it's going to be a Mr. Thomas Baker. I hope I get all of this right. This man is very accomplished, and he's the author of the book, The Fall of the FBI. He has been, he's a commissioner of the Pitkin County Elections Commission, vice chairman, executive committee of a national cybercrime investigative program. He's on a commissioner of a Colorado Judiciary Performance Commission, executive committee member of National Cybercrimes Investigation, member of the board of directors for the CEI, which is cyber investigation. He was a legal attaché in the FBI he went to, I think, Paris, France, and he was in Canada. I believe he speaks English and French. Whole lot. This man's very accomplished, like I said, author and everything else. So let's get him on in here. How you doing, Mr. Baker?
Glad to be with you.
We're happy. I'm happy to have you. I mean, it's an honor. I mean, you've had a awesome career, obviously. You want to tell us about your book, a little bit about your stuff? I know you just wrote an
Well,
article that was in the Wall Street Journal or something like that.
yes. Several weeks ago, I had an article in the Wall Street Journal drawing on the my experience. I was the first FBI agent at the scene of Ronald Reagan's attempted assassination in Washington, D.C., outside the Washington Hilton. And then it just really struck me and grabbed me, the attempted assassination of President Trump about 4 weeks ago. So I wrote an article, a rather long article for the Wall Street Journal, and they published it, uh, comparing these two events, what's similar, what's different, and actually hearkening back to the uh, assassination of President John F. Kennedy. I was a child when that happened, as most of us were. Some of us weren't even born then. But it was a significant event in American history, and it was a significant event in law enforcement history, which is particular interest to you and your viewers and listeners. Um, when President Kennedy was shot, unfortunately, uh, the reaction to that, the response to that, was there's no other way to say it. It was a law enforcement fiasco. The FBI, the Secret Service, the Dallas Police, the Dallas Sheriff's Office, other state and local authorities in Texas were all, quite frankly, fighting with each other, arguing with each other. This led to the mishandling of evidence and ultimately the mishandling of the prisoner, the assassin of President Kennedy, Jack Lee Harvey Oswald. And that mishandling eventually led to or facilitated his murder by another subject, Jack Ruby. And of course, that happening, the murder of the shooter right after the murder of the president, led to all sorts of conspiracy theories and finger pointing, some of which we still have to this day. So, as a result of that horrible incident, in the FBI, we trained how to appropriately respond to these things. It turns out the Secret Service did as well. The United States Congress, just a few years after President Kennedy's murder, passed a new law clearly making uh, the assassination or any attack on the President of the United States a federal crime. Strangely enough, it had not been a federal crime up to then, which led to some of the confusion and misunderstandings. Uh, so we studied that, and that was all on our minds. And then when President Ronald Reagan was shot in an attempted assassination just 2 months after being in office, I was out in my car. I proceeded to the scene, and it just so happens I was the first agent on the scene. And as I was going there, first FBI agent, and I was going there, I had in my mind that we have to handle this right. This is a historic event. It's a historic case. Uh, we have to do the right thing. And I was quite frankly afraid, having heard all these terrible stories about Kennedy's shooting, that there might be some disagreements, some turf wars, things of that nature. That was not the case whatsoever. There was perfect cooperation. I arrived on the scene, and the lieutenant who was actually in charge of the homicide division of the MPD, that is the Washington Metropolitan Police Department, had already recovered the revolver from the shooter, John Hinckley, and he came up to me with that right away. And then a moment later, a man by the name of Powers, who was the agent in charge of the Secret Service in Washington, D.C., came up to me and he said, "You're the FBI, you're taking over now." So it was perfect cooperation. And throughout the day, principally with the Washington Metropolitan Police and the Secret Service, the FBI worked in a textbook model of cooperation, and everybody cooperated with each other. And we all had the sense that this was a historic case and it had to be handled correctly. So then, when I saw here a few weeks ago And by the way, if you have any questions as I'm talking, please don't hesitate to interrupt me with a question.
I'm just listening intently, believe it or not.
Okay, so then when I saw, of course, it really got my attention, uh, Trump shooting, and I saw a lot of things were done well, and I was quite frankly surprised that some things weren't done that well. Congressional committees are now looking at it, but apparently there wasn't the close cooperation and coordination between the state and locals in Pennsylvania and the U.S. Secret Service that there should have been. And that's rather disappointing because, as you know, and you've worked out on the road in motorcycles and everything, some of the things that went wrong there in Pennsylvania that we know about already, we don't know the whole story yet, of course,
No, we don't.
was communications between in this instance, the Secret Service, a federal agency, and the county and state police on the scene there in Butler, Pennsylvania. And I was shocked and disappointed by that because in major events for management, for decades, and there's been several operating principles that have evolved and that's used by law enforcement throughout this country. And I'm sure you're aware of this. Well, one thing is you exchange personnel in one another's command posts. So in the federal command post, there should be a representative of the Pennsylvania State Police and perhaps that county sheriff's office and some others, and vice versa. The Secret Service should have a representative in the command post that the county or the state have set up there in Butler. And having somebody physically in your command post really facilitates communications. If there is any question, any misunderstanding, things can be resolved quickly. The other thing is the actual comms, the radio communication itself. I found it shocking that the Secret Service and the state and locals were not able to communicate with one another on the radios. Now, since then, we've heard, and there's a lot of things we're going to hear, but one of the things we heard is that I believe it was the state police, had radios available to give to the Secret Service, and they never picked them up. I don't know the truth of that exactly, but for years in this country, there have been common channels between law enforcement agencies. And as you know, being on the road, I remember as a working agent, I worked in your part of the country for a while in Alabama and in Florida. We'd be out in the car and on our old fashioned Motorola radios we had in the car, we'd be talking to one another, that is amongst the FBI, on what we call channel 1 or channel 2. But we had in both those states, we had a common channel 4, we could just click over to, and we were in touch with the Alabama State Police or the Florida Highway Patrol. And I mean, this is decades ago we had this. So it's inexplicable to me how the communications between the Secret Service and the county and state police in Butler, Pennsylvania was so poor that they couldn't relay messages instantly to each other.
Well,
That is really shocking and disappointing.
that's a complete failure there because football season about to start. Of course, I'm a motorcycle cop, and I worked LSU football games. LSU is so big, and the games, have tens of thousands of people come out. The department can't handle it themselves, so they subcontract out all these local sheriff's offices around and police departments around. And it's amazing that you can have 500-600 or more cops, all from maybe from 10 or 12 different agencies. And guess what? We all can go to what do we call it, an interop channel. We have state interop channels on our radio. We can all go to this one channel, and let's say 500 cops out there can all hear exactly what's going on one channel that work for 12 different departments. So yeah, they have no excuse why they couldn't have done so. Especially that's the Secret Service and stuff like that. But
yeah, it's really shocking and it's inexplicable. And the other thing that was slightly inexplicable, it's been fixed a little bit, is in the FBI, and I'm sure in all police departments, when there is an incident, when there is an attack any kind of crime involving an assault or attack on any person, one of the key interviews that has to be done early on is an interview of the victim. If the victim is alive, you want to talk to the victim. And I was surprised that 3 weeks went by. Director Ray of the FBI testified before Congress, and they still had not interviewed the president, the victim. In the Ronald Reagan assassination attempt, we interviewed him about 3 days later, and the only reason it took us 3 days is Ronald Reagan, as you may recall, was seriously injured and he required major surgery. So we had 2 agents go to interview him in the hospital, and it was about 2 or 3 days after the actual assault. But even when the victim, as is often the case, can't tell you anything, it's a box you have to check. You have to interview the victim, get the victim's impressions, and get it early on before the victim hears from other people and gets ideas planted in their head, which may not be their own recollection. So that was quite surprising to me that it took so long to interview the president, the former president, the victim in this case. And of course, there's thousands of people to be interviewed, and that's not unusual in this kind of a crime scene. So I wrote about that in the Wall Street Journal. And to this day, there's still people who suspect some sort of conspiracy in connection with Kennedy's shooting. Fortunately, there's never been a serious allegation from any quarter or any criticism of the investigation of the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan. Now, you might say, well, we apprehended the shooter immediately, which is the case. But even then, we didn't know for several hours what his motive was or why he did it or who he was connected about. So it was a response to a crisis. And as I say, with cooperation on numerous levels, and I mentioned the Washington Metropolitan Police, but actually in the District of Columbia, we also have, and they were on the scene actually, you have the U.S. Park Police and the U.S. Capitol Police, which are 2 substantial and independent police agencies. One of the benefits, or looking back on it in hindsight, of that investigation was the fact of knowing one another. So I know the Secret Service is challenged because they go often into new territory, and perhaps nobody from the Secret Service had ever been to Butler, Pennsylvania before. In our kind of investigation, in most law enforcement investigations, that's not the case. So I had been working on crime in the District of Columbia for some time, and it was fortunate I personally knew Detective Lieutenant Jimmy Wilson, who was in charge of the homicide part of the Washington Metropolitan Police. I knew Powers, the head of the Secret Service in their field office in Washington. I knew many other individuals, and several of us knew a man who was a key player that day, Al Fury. Al Fury was a retired police officer who was the director of security at the Washington Hilton Hotel, and he was literally on the scene where President Reagan was shot. So he was very helpful with his own information, but he was also helpful in helping us set up immediately a forward command post. So all of these things, the lesson for anyone in any level of law enforcement is to know your counterparts. A lot of course, the working officers on the street, the working detectives often know their counterparts. But for the people in management positions, be they the chief, the sheriff, the special agent in charge, they need to get out of the office. They need to meet their counterparts. They need to know their counterparts. And quite frankly, even to this day, there are individuals who don't do that, and they should, and they need to. But as I say, there's been no rumors, no allegations that anything is wrong with the investigation of Reagan's shooting. We still have problems with Kennedy's shooting, and it remains to be seen how this will go down in the history books, this attempted assassination of President Trump.
Well, I think it's strange they gave the body back, and the body's cremated already that fast. That was just I mean, the body's dust already. And just, I mean, I was actually watching when it happened, and I just, my heart like just sank. I was like, oh my God, you know. I mean, then, you know, it was millimeters, and then I've escorted, I had to, I'm in Louisiana outside of Baton Rouge, so we don't have to do a lot, but, you know, I've been on motors for over 20 years, so when they do come in town, I'm one of them that gets tasked with Baton Rouge City and stuff. And I've escorted Obama, I escorted Biden, I've escorted Hillary Clinton. Recently we did we had the energy secretary going to oil reserve out here, and I've done Trump. And I'll say, you know, I'll say this: I see how the Secret Service works when they're supposed to be working. People think, I mean, it's no joke. They bring a bomb sniffing dog out and sniff all our motorcycles and stuff. We're all the law enforcement. They sniff us down, and if you know where to look at, you can see the sniper they got watching us because we're so close to, you know, the vehicles and stuff. And it's just, you know, so for them to fail on the how they did on this, that was just, I was like, oh my God, it's just a complete failure. And then, you know, I don't try to be rude, but them females they had watching me, you had one that can't holster, and they were trying to make excuses. I have a paddle holster. I wear quite a bit. I can close my eyes, never look at it, and holster and unholster it. And it's double retention. And it's like, I was taught, just local law enforcement department I used to work for, if you looked at your holster when on the firing line while you were holstering your weapon, they would kick you off because you never take your eyes off the target. And it's just, then you got a 5'2" girl standing there trying to protect a 6'3" man. Come on, President Trump is very tall. Because of everybody I escorted, believe it or not, and I've mentioned several times, he is the only man that refused to get back on a plane until he shook every one of our hands and thanked us. You know, so
little things like that show you the character, the true character of a person.
Oh, yeah.
That's certainly for sure.
Yeah, so I see people online lately. I try to stay out of it, and you know, like, oh, he said this about the troops. Let me tell you what, I didn't get to sit down and talk to the man, but for this man to take time out of his busy schedule to shake, you know, 40 cops' hands that escorted him on motorcycles and tell them thank you and stuff like that, and take a picture with us, he didn't have to do that. He could have been like everybody else. I escorted Obama. I never even put eyes on the man. Never saw him. I never saw Biden. I never saw Hillary. None of them. And we escorted them all over the city. Never put eyes on them. For this man to take time out, and so people that are saying, you know, that, and I'm not trying to campaign for him, but I'm just saying that he said the troops are this. I was like, no, this man has nothing respect for the police, the military, and this country, because he's an older man. He could retire and go play golf for the rest of his life. Instead, he's putting his life on the line because he don't want to see his country fail. That's just my opinion.
Yes, no, I think you're absolutely right. And these little things, and we've all had occasion, and you've had occasion with quite a few people, obviously, to brush up against some well-known people. And the little things really do show you a lot. And as I say in my book, we chose two agents to interview President Ronald Reagan after he was shot. Both the agents we chose were individuals who, and we knew this, of course, who had suffered gunshot wounds themselves. And we just thought that would be a good thing for them to do. They could talk to him and establish a rapport with him, which they did. What they relate, they were very touched by Reagan's behavior. They go into his hospital room and he's sitting in bed, and he welcomed them as if he was welcoming them into his home. And on the bedside stand, there was a pitcher of water and a couple of cups of water. And he started to pour out water for each of them as welcoming them into his room. And of course, as they realized this happened, they told us one of them reached over and took the water pitcher and said, "No, Mr. President, we'll do that." But that's how he was. He was very hospitable. He was very friendly. And of course, no surprise, but he still had to be questioned. He didn't see who shot him. He actually didn't even remember being shot. He remembered things up to then, and then he remembered little bits of being taken to the hospital. Excuse me. But you still have to, it's a base you have to cover, you have to ask. And there were a series of other questions they had to ask him. So that went very well. And they say he remained in character, as all the stories and movies about him have shown. They say he joked with them. And at one point, as they were talking to him, he said to them, getting shot hurts. And of course, they both laughed and said, yes, we know that.
Could imagine. I could even imagine, how nervous were you when you were responding to that? The president's been shot. And then you realize that, shit, I'm the first one here on the scene. I got to make sure I don't screw nothing up, because this is really going to look bad.
It was stressful, and initially it was rather chaotic, because as I got there, a lot of ambulances were arriving from several directions, making a lot of noise. And also what had happened, the Marines, the Marine Corps helicopters, they call it Marine Corps One, that transport the president, are very close by. They're at the Naval Air Station in Anacostia, which is a neighborhood right in the district. So they dispatched their 2 helicopters as soon as they heard this. So as I got to the scene, the helicopters arrived above. So there's tall buildings. It was a very urban area. There's very tall buildings, and the helicopters, and they're these big, heavy, helicopters. They lingered perhaps for 5 or 10 minutes right above the scene, standing by, and then they departed again. Well, of course, that was making a lot of noise, in addition to the ambulances arriving and a crowd gathering. So it was chaotic. And in the 2 or 3 minutes that I was in the car, and I was constantly on that radio, I was thinking all the things we had to do, kind of a checklist in my mind, if you will. So yes, I was nervous, but the wonderful thing about it was that everybody cooperated. It was just a textbook example of law enforcement cooperation. And that's why I must say this again, I find it so shocking and disappointing that there was this lack of communication and lack of coordination between the state and locals in Pennsylvania and the Secret Service. That really is almost inexplicable, except for what you touched on about some of the personnel today. And I think a problem I know we have in all the federal agencies, and I hope it's not seeping into the states, is this DEI, this diversity, inclusion, equity. They're trying to fit, round pegs into square holes, and
Box
vice
checkers.
versa.
I call them check marks. They hire in check marks.
So even right after he left office, former Attorney General Bill Barr talked about this at a conference just last year. And he said he was specifically talking about the FBI, but I think you could say this applies to the Secret Service, certainly, and others. And he was saying how this DEI has really diminished the performance. They've lowered all standards. They say they haven't, but the Attorney General who was there, who was an Attorney General who was very engaged with the law enforcement agencies, by the way, he said he saw it. He went to Quantico on numerous occasions and saw how even the physical training standards were being diminished to accommodate DEI, and that has this very adverse effect. So it's a problem. I know we all hope, we have a change in administration in November. We get a new president, and the new president, if it's Trump who you were talking about, is able to appoint a new FBI director and a new attorney general. Will get some progress perhaps and turn some of this around. But the problem is now it seeps so deeply into the culture. And as far as the FBI goes, you only have one presidential appointee. So Trump can appoint a new director, which undoubtedly he will. But that's not enough. You need to really enlist, what I've proposed to several people who are close to him, is you need to enlist a task force, call it an advisory committee, call it what you will, to get in, to get several layers down in there and start preaching and making change. It's going to be too big a thing for one individual to do, and that has to be done.
Well, it's got to be. You don't have to answer this or not because it's up to you. And this ain't no gotcha question. It's an honest question I just thought of. You being a retired FBI and stuff like that, how do you feel? Because I'm going to tell you, me growing up, especially as a young cop and all this through the year, man, you know, I looked at the FBI and the Secret Service, man. That was the cream of the crop right there. You done made it. If you're FBI and you're Secret, you're the cream of the crop. You the best of the best. Now I look at the FBI and the Secret Service, and the FBI more or less to me has been weaponized and stuff like that. They're doing shit that I call them the FB lies because they lie about so much stuff. The Secret Service, I'm like, I know. We have a man out here that I worked with for a lot of years. His son is actually on the Secret Service. This kid, I saw this kid grow up. This kid is a bang up kid. You know, I don't know if he's on what kind of, because the Secret Service is so mass. I don't know if he's guarding anybody or whatever. But this is a bang up kid. You know, he would be great as a personal guard like they have on those. But it's like, I'm just I don't look up to the FBI. Everybody says, oh, FBI. And I'm like, oh, whatever. They're just going to fucking something up or something like that. And I saw this with the Secret Service. I was like, look at this. This is a joke. That one woman, how you guarding the president when you ducking? I mean, yes. you can't be bent over. You got to be standing up straight. As bad as it is, hey, if you got to take a bullet for him, that's your job. It's hard. I mean, and really, a lot of people's like, well, you don't know what you're going to do. I don't know what you had in your career, but you don't know how you're going to react until bullets are flying around you. You can take somebody. Yes. You can take somebody. You can't train somebody that's going to stand there and take a bullet for somebody else until it actually happens. You got people that say, I've been in a shootout and I was with some people, and you know, they had a couple people that surprised me that I thought that did not stand up and do what they did and retreated when they shouldn't have, put it that way, okay? And I saw other people that I go to battle with any day of the week. And, you know, but you can't prove yourself until it's under fire. And those people...
Well, you're absolutely right.
Those people ought to be removed. They ought to be removed, put them on... Don't have to fire them. Put them on a desk job or something. Put them on something when they walk around interviewing people before they get there. They don't need to be on protection itself.
Well, I'm sorry to say I agree with everything you said. And like yourself, in growing up as a young boy, as a young man, my grandfather and a couple of my uncles were police officers, which I explained that in the book too. And I had this ambition to get involved in law enforcement. And I was 33 years in the FBI. And since then, for several years, I was very much engaged with the criminal justice system and some of the consulting work I did later. And it just breaks my heart to see what has happened and how things have gotten so off track. And that's why we entitled my book, The Fall of the FBI. And yet I organized the book in three parts. It's obviously a nonfiction book, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I talk about the good, the way things used to be done. The ugly is what was shocking to me over the years, because I was very naive at first, like most of us are, and I thought justice was perfect. And I found out justice isn't always perfect.
It's so imperfect.
Make a long story short, as you've probably seen, there are people who should be in jail who aren't in jail.
Yes.
But just as bad and maybe worse, there are some people in jail who shouldn't be in jail.
That is correct.
To make a long story short. And then, of course, the good, the bad, and the ugly is what's happened to the FBI in the last half dozen years or so. And it's just getting away from your roots, getting away from your main business. The key, I think, was the change that Bob Mueller instituted after September 11th. The law enforcement, the FBI always had a law enforcement ethos, values. And as you know, and as everybody else in law enforcement knows, In a law enforcement agency, consciously or unconsciously, you exist, you live every day for when the day comes that you have to go into court, stand up, raise your right hand, and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to a set of facts.
Correct.
It's quite different from the law enforcement agency that Mueller and then Comey created. In a law enforcement agency, they don't deal in facts, they deal in estimates, best guesses. They call them intelligence estimates. They utilize deception and deceit as a tool. And this opened the door for so much of the bad stuff that happened in the Russian collusion investigation and the things we've seen since then. That has to be corrected. It has to get back on track. It's going to be very hard to do, but it has to be done.
Oh yeah, it's just, and you talking about getting on a stand. One of my things that I always talk about. I've done, no one's perfect. I've done some stupid stuff in my career. Okay, I think everybody ends up doing stupid stuff in their career, especially when I was in my 20s. I started doing this when I was 23 years old. I mean, I was stupid. I tell everybody, I didn't really get my head screwed on straight until my mid 30s, really, almost 40 years old, before I actually figured out who I was and everything else like that. Other than that, I was just muddling through life, and but I did stupid stuff. But there's one thing I never did. And I tell all these people in law enforcement all the time, what I never did, because I got asked on another podcast, what's one advice I give to rookies. I'm like, my one advice is don't ever lie. Whenever, and I'm through the years, all my bosses know this now, still know today. If I get called in on, you can call me in on a carpet, which is in front of, the big boss. You call me in and ask me, did you say this or did I do that? If I did it, guess what? I will straight up say, yes, I did. But if I didn't do it, I'll fight you to the death. But I will never try to cover up, lie, or anything else. I got called and they said, did you tell this woman one time that her boyfriend was a raging steroid head and that was wrong? What was wrong with him? I said, yeah, pretty much, I think almost an exact quote of what I said. I took a day suspension for it. But you know what? I didn't lie about it. But you know what? When I've got called in and asked about it, I didn't lie about it. Me and another cop, this was probably 6-7 years ago, I was backing up and he was backing up. 2 brand spanking new units. We bumped each other. You couldn't even barely see the scuff on each one because we were barely moving. Somebody else there said, I wasn't. Nope. We called and reported it. Told them what happened, sent them pictures. You know what? We didn't get no trouble, but you know why? Because we called and told them the truth. We didn't try to hide nothing at all. Always tell the truth. And I feel like we don't have that anymore.
I think, unfortunately, I think you're right. It's something lacking today. It's even a bigger problem than we think. And former Attorney General Bill Barr pointed this out. We have in these agencies a deliberate program of DEI, of wokeness, of changing the values. But at the same time, we're recruiting people from a large society, and many people in society don't share these traditional values. A key value, and something that in all law enforcement agencies in the United States, we certainly should emphasize, but particularly in an organization like the FBI, is the Constitution.
Yes.
When I was in new agents training, most of our classroom time was spent on the Constitution, particularly the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. And it got to the point that our instructors, who were themselves agents who were attorneys, they told us that we should not look at the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment as obstacles or barriers, that we should embrace them. And they went so far in those days as to give us each a pocket copy of the Constitution and told us to keep it in our breast pocket. And that if we had the Constitution with us when we were interviewing a citizen or searching somebody's home, we wouldn't go off the track, we wouldn't go wrong. It sounds like a little thing, and perhaps to some people it sounds corny, but a lot of us did that. And I realize now that's one of the things that was lacking in the Russian collusion investigation and in these screw ups over the last half dozen years since then is there's not that reverence for the Constitution that there once had been when they can propose, intelligence analysts in the FBI can propose investigating traditionalist Catholics who like to worship using Latin, for example, to investigate parents who go to school boards and raise their voice at school board meetings. They're completely forgetting the guide rails of the first 10 amendments, that these people have the right to freedom of speech,
Yes.
freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. And part of our job in law enforcement is to help guarantee and protect those rights.
Yes. Correct. I mean, I have people sometimes, I get cussed. That didn't happen to me today, but I get cussed out all the time. I've been cussed out so much. People just like, I see people flip me off and I'll wave at them. I'm like, thanks for telling me I'm number one. I mean, people's like, oh, it's like, I see some of these videos and these cops going to pull people. I was like, you can't pull them over for that. So what? They flipped you off. Get it out. Stop getting your little feelings hurt so bad. If your feelings get hurt easily, you're in the wrong profession. I tell people, you gotta have some thick skin because people are going to talk to you stupid. Most people I meet, or if I pull somebody over, especially being a traffic cop, obviously they're having a bad day. Automatically.
Yeah.
Nobody I walk up to in a car is having a good day at that point because guess what? I just pulled them over. So their day is automatically bad. So it's like almost everybody I meet is not in a good mood. So just people going to say stuff to you. They're going to call you fat. They're going to call you ugly. They're going to, say all kind of stuff to you. Just so what? They don't know. I try to tell everybody, I'm like, these people don't know you. So what? It don't matter, but it's like now, like you're talking about with the FBI stuff. I mean, with the Russian collusion. I mean, what about how they covered up the laptop thing? They covered that up, calling it fake. I mean, it's just they've done so much stuff. I mean, I don't know if you know this. The ATF just shot and killed another person last night.
Oh, I didn't know that.
In Texas, yes, they did another raid at 6 o'clock in the morning for somebody. I guess they say were selling switches or something like that, and they ended up shooting another person. I mean, if this person had no criminal history or nothing like that, to me, I mean, just catch them outside their house or something like that and stuff like that. That's two people. They killed that airport guy. I mean, this guy. I mean, he worked at an airport as a director or something. He wasn't. You see, somebody comes to your house and kicks your door in at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I have a gun. Yeah, I'm going to grab a gun. It's almost, I don't know. It's just I try to. That's one thing people do say on my podcast when I go over stuff. I try to wait for the whole things to come out because I'm not one of those cops that automatically think, oh, law enforcement's always right, because they're not.
Sadly, we all know that. But the thing is, if the basic culture is correct, we'll be able to handle our own bad apples.
Yes.
And that's what we have to work on to keep the culture correct. Listen, this has been a wonderful time on your podcast. I've really enjoyed it immensely. I do want to ask.
There you go. Yeah.
If you could, to mention to your viewers and listeners, my book, The Fall of the FBI. I'd appreciate.
I'll put it in the description. The description in the bottom for you.
So much.
It's on Amazon. Where can they get it at?
You can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Barnes & Noble online, Books A Million, the other online booksellers. Some bookstores do have it. Some of the Barnes & Noble stores have it. But most people today buy their books on Amazon. It's like so many other things.
Oh, yeah.
It's there.
It's kind of
and
like.
In fact, I'll give a little hint. Amazon has just reduced the price.
So you can go get it on sale at Amazon.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Don't hang up yet. We're going to close it out, everybody. I appreciate everybody. Listen, I really appreciate our guest today, and I was very impressed. I mean, he's got a great career. So anytime you want to come back, you're welcome. And
thank you.
Put the outro. Y'all be safe. Watch your back. Watch your partner's back. Remember, we're not sheepdogs around here. We're all lions. Till next time.
Thank you.
Okay.